Today's guest is an international UFO researcher, lecturer, broadcaster, and author of numerous books. He is the former Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association and former MUFON representative for England. Please give a huge Koit welcome to Philip Mantle. Hi Philip, and welcome to KoitCast.
Good afternoon.
It's lovely to have you here, so thank you for coming. Your time is much appreciated. I suppose we should start right at the beginning and say, who are you, where you're from, what do you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah, good question. First and foremost, I live in Pontefract in West Yorkshire in the north of England. Some might recognise that from my accent, but there you go. What am I? That's an even difficult question. I'm a UFO researcher, author and publisher. Been involved in this subject now for 40 plus years. Some might say I've been involved too long, and they might be right, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there you go. I've been around a long time.
Excellent stuff. What brought you into the paranormal theatre? What is your origin story?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a young lad, I was interested in a number of things. There was, of course, the space program, astronomy in general. Loved horror movies, you know, but above them all was all things paranormal. You know, ghosts, the psychic phenomena. I mean, it was great for where I lived. I lived just outside of Leeds at that point in time. My best friend's grandma lived at the opposite side of the road, and I used to go with her on occasions to the spiritualist church.
Oh, nice.
Now, I didn't necessarily believe it all, but I still found it absolutely fascinating. So all things paranormal that I could lay my hands on or read about, would have interest to me. And I still keep a working interest, shall we say, in all things paranormal, but obviously UFOs being the main thing that I am involved in.
Can you tell me what is it about the UFO topic in particular that has drawn you to it?
Yeah, I mean, I read, again, going back some time now, an astronomy book. No idea what the title of it was at the time, but it had one chapter in it that talked about UFOs, but pretty much dismissed them. Oh. And I found it rather strange because there were things in this astronomy book that were purely theoretical, and it was highly likely that it was all nonsense. But they were willing to treat that in a serious manner, but not this other subject. So that kind of bugged me a little bit. And, I thought, I need to know a little bit more about this. So on the occasion I could get to read about it, be it a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, I would do. Well, when I left high school at the age of 16, kind of, messed around for a few years. And then in the winter of 1978, over into 1979, a friend and I went to work in what was West Germany and couldn't speak the language, So I rang my mum and said, "Can you send me some books, Mum?" My mum was always a great reader. And sure enough, this box arrived and they were all UFO books. I think she bought them on the local market. So after work on an evening, couldn't watch the TV because I had no idea what they were talking about. I'd sit and read. And then when I came home in 1979, just by chance, my aunt lived round the corner from us, and Leeds published a newspaper called the Yorkshire Evening Post, still going now, and she brought it round. And there was a small advert for the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society that coming Sunday in Leeds. So I didn't drive at the time. Got the bus into Leeds that Sunday, and of course, in that era, everything used to shut pretty much on a Sunday, But nonetheless, I found the location, and it was a rather large building, and I could hear some noise coming from one of the rooms, and it was formed by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. They put on a presentation. I was amazed to see a table full of books because they were hard to come by in your local library, so I could buy some more books. And that was it, mate. I was hooked, and never looked back.
That raises a question for me, right? So when your mum sent you those books that she got on the buy one get one free, or whatever deal she had. Did she know you liked UFOs, or was she just sending you randoms?
No, because my mum was interested in some aspects of the paranormal herself, not to any great depth. She was just interested. And I used to talk to her, and she was a regular visitor of the library. So I used to say to her, Mum, when you go to the library, if there's any books on UFOs, will you get it for me?
Good.
And there were few and far between, I have to be honest. There was none at all in the school library. So she knew of my interest. And of course, she'd seen them, on the market, all paperbacks. She may have well been thinking as well, if I buy him these, they'll be cheaper to send because they're not so heavy
Yeah, that's true.
So they all just seemed to work well together. And, but my mum had a little bit of an interest herself, yes.
Yeah. I remember when I was at school, I mean, I'm not as early as yours, no disrespect, but late 70s, early 80s for myself. There was only like 2 or 3 books in our library that I could get. And I was always getting those out to read. But there's not many. But nowadays, it's prevalent, isn't it? They're everywhere.
Well, you don't need the library now. I would encourage people to still use it, but there is, the physical and the virtual library today. I'll give you an example. When in the 80s, when Whitley Strieber's Communion came out, where I lived, we had no bookshops. I had to go into Leeds, and there was the main bookshop, which was the other side of Leeds. So it was a good long walk across the city from the bus station that I had to go. And when I asked them for it, do you have a copy? They checked and said, yeah. And it was actually in the religious section. So, yeah. So it was quite a trek to go and buy the latest book. But nonetheless, I did and still have that copy today. So always interested in reading about it. And I was just grateful to have attended that meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society on that particular Sunday.
You see, I like to look back at these points in people's lives where they sort of like you take a path that then takes you on the direction you are at now. And I love those points because they're always something so minor. Do you know what I mean? That's led you in a direction.
Absolutely. I mean, that day changed my life. No great epiphany or anything like that, but it did. When I look back, it did indeed change my life, because even though I left school with no real qualifications. So I went to work in a factory, which I didn't mind at all. In fact, I enjoyed. I became the shop steward there, and I worked with a great bunch of guys for a lot of years. But I also had this get out of jail card, which was my involvement and my interest in the UFO subject. So whilst working away on a night shift, for example, maybe bored to tears, I had something else to keep my mind occupied with. And I often said some of my best ideas I dreamt up on while working night shift. You know what I mean? So,
where your mind is elsewhere. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mine's the same. I always get my best ideas either in the bed in the morning or in the shower in the loo. You know what I mean? When you're free to think.
Well, I was the shop steward, you see, so I always used to keep a little notebook on me as well. So if something popped into my head, I'd write it down, stick it away.
I think Whitley's book cover as well has got I've said this before in a previous interview, but his book cover has probably switched path for a lot of people.
Well, it was an iconic cover. I think it even won some marketing awards for the cover, because there was, on the original book, there was no writing on the cover, just the face. And in the newspaper, they did a newspaper ad, and again, it was just the face. And then there was a free phone number, and you rang that number, and it told you about the book. I mean,
That's clever in those days, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very clever.
Yeah, a very striking image that I know that's always struck with me, which leads us into the first big topic of choice, which is the alien abduction phenomenon or alien abduction cases. So before we dive in, let's define alien abduction or alien contact. Oh, so actually, no, let's define alien abduction, and does it differ from alien contact?
Good question. I mean, alien abduction is fairly simple to explain. People will have an experience where they encounter a UFO on the ground and claim to have been taken inside it, subjected to tests, examinations, whatever, and put back from whence they came. That can be from their car, out walking the dog, from their bed, fishing, from a variety of locations. Alien contact might not be the same. It can just be like, I wrote a book called UFO Landings UK, and you could have called it, UFO contacts, alien contacts UK, because they were all seeing beings and things like that. So is that contact or is it not? Some people claim to have had, messages implanted into their mind at the same time. So there is, there's a kind of an overlap between the two, I think, at times.
Okay. Is there commonalities in abduction cases that we could point our finger at and say, this is pretty much going to happen in every case? Or is it slight overlaps?
There's nothing you can point that says this is going to happen in every case. What happened some time back, an American by the name of Dr. Eddie Bullard did a study on abduction cases. And what he did, he took out the details of it, but put together the parameters that make the experience, so to speak. And he noticed that there were patterns, for example, one of them was what he called doorway amnesis. In other words, you couldn't remember actually going onto the thing. You'd see it, they grab you, you might see an opening or a doorway, but you don't remember going through it. So that was one of the things he noticed. But so you have like a core list of types of things that happen, the parameters that build it, but no case has them all. No case has, so it's very, very difficult. One of the things I realized back in the 90s, my first book was called Without Consent. It's all about abduction cases in the UK. And I literally drove from one end of the country to the other. The only place I didn't go was Ireland, and that was because I couldn't find anybody to interview. Otherwise, I would have gone. But what I did find out, I call them, I don't know if it's the right word, but side effects. And I don't mean scratching or rashes or anything like that, but they had an artistic or environmental nature to these side effects. For example, some of them will become interested in environmental, green issues, as we call them now.
Okay.
Whereas before they weren't. Some will become interested in what we might call spiritual things. Others were purely artistic. They start drawing, writing poems, etc. One young man in Puerile in Northwest Wales, David, after his encounter, he got a job in his local hotel as a waiter, and he would write spontaneous poetry. He had to write it. He said, "I'd write it on the napkins, on a beer mat." And he said, "Please don't tell my friends, Philip, that I'm writing poetry." You know what I mean? But he was very much like me at his age. He had long hair, denim jacket, like rock music, not interested in poetry at all. I probably wouldn't know a poem or a poet. But after the encounter, these things started to manifest. And he said that he was convinced it was a result of what happened to him. But again, it doesn't happen in every case, So I've made it just a question I ask if I speak to anybody new, anything happened to you afterwards? Anything in your life change? That kind of thing. And it's not a perfect way to look at it. It's a little rule of thumb to say, oh yeah, I've started painting or drawing one fella, John Day, back in the 1970s in Avon in Essex, John was already a carpenter, he liked to do woodwork. But I met John some years later and interviewed him, and he was making the most beautiful dolls' houses, handmade, that you had ever seen. You would never let your child play with them if you got one of those, But he also said that after the encounter, he became deeply interested in environmental issues, So whether there's something there or not, I don't know.
What would you say is the sort of percentage likelihood if someone comes back with that nudged in a different direction or an enhanced ability if we go down that route? Is it high?
It's difficult because it's never been checked with every case. But I would give it a 50-50 or somewhere close to that, And it's just a little thing for people to look up. I might be entirely wrong. It could be completely coincidental, It's just something that I noticed, and then I started asking the question of others. And it's like, I was the first to have Whitley Strieber come to the UK and lecture. And he put on an amazing presentation, and then he did a Q&A afterwards. And Whitley's forgotten this, but I found it quite profound, so I've always remembered it. A person in the audience says, "Are we getting any closer to the truth?" or words to that effect. And Whitley said, "We're learning to ask better questions." And I think that's as relevant today as it was then.
Well, I think that's just that. That's good, but I also think that comes with the territory on anything. So if the more a subject is talked about, the more you have to then ask new questions. Otherwise, you get bored with the same questions and answers. So you have to push the envelope, don't you, a bit more to learn more, to then learn more, and then go back round the circle, and you're expanding that circle like a spiral of information, really.
Yeah.
That's the way I think of it. The interesting thing about the UFO interactions that then lead to extra abilities and stuff is very reminiscent to me of the near-death experiences where people say the same thing.
Yes.
Which then makes you ask the question, are the two almost the same?
Well, I can't talk with authority about alien abduction. I've never had an experience, but I have had a near-death experience personally. Oh, wow. I'm a long sufferer from heart disease. I had a heart attack in 1999. In 2009, I was diagnosed with heart failure. I had a pacemaker and a defib fitted. In 2016, I had an attack of something called arrhythmia, where your heart goes really fast. And I thought, this is it, I'm dead. I was at home in my kitchen, put my hand on my chest, put my other hand on the kitchen unit to try and keep me upright. My heart was going like a buzzsaw, my knees buckled. Just as I hit the floor almost, my defib fired. And that reset me, if you like. But then I realized I'd been watching all of this we have a long galley kitchen, from the other end of the kitchen, looking down on it.
Whoa. With
no emotion, just as if I were watching something that happens every day. So I could see it happening, but I'm looking down on it, And this only lasted a number of seconds. I didn't see any lights. In fact, my heart didn't stop. I didn't lose consciousness or anything of that nature. I screamed for my wife, who was in the other room, and I managed to get to my knees and go into the living room. And, my wife summoned the ambulance. But I remember looking down on it quite dispassionately, and I know my heart didn't stop and everything, because your pacemaker has a recorder in it. And it was checked when I was at the hospital. They download all the information to see what's caused, see if they could find a cause for the arrhythmia. Yeah. But I didn't lose consciousness, didn't pass out, my heart didn't stop. So make of it what you will, I just say to people, this is what happened. I'm not claiming anything, it just did.
I love the story and also don't like it because obviously you have to go through the pain of your heart issues and stuff. A question it throws up is, while you were at the back end of the galley, for want of a better phrase, looking down on yourself, were you also in your body looking out so you could see two perceptions at the same time?
Yeah, because not so much looking out, I was looking down at the floor, because
that's what I mean.
That's where I was heading. And once my defib fired, I hope you never have to experience it. It really does give you a kick.
Oh, crikey.
And I felt I heard a noise when it went off. I don't know if I did, but it sounded to me like when you get a hammer and hit a metal anvil, dink. And then I didn't get upright. I kind of got half up, still looking at the floor, staggered forward so I could see my legs going in front of me, opened the living room door and into my wife. And then I just remember things completely normal after that event, Make of it what you will.
It's highly intriguing and interesting. And also the fact that you are dispassionate about your body, like you don't care what's happening almost. That's a common thread that I hear in the near-death experiences.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it.
Very strange.
I can just see that happening. not to do with me. I'm bothered. You know,
Don't even know who that guy is. Yeah.
yeah. But on the other hand, you know, I'm fighting to stay alive. So there was complete polar opposites in that respect.
How very odd. Hard to reconcile these things.
You know, and I'm not a religious man. I'm not a believer in life after death or
heaven. You're not?
No, not at all. Not at all. This just happened.
Have you got Netflix?
Yes.
There's a series on that called Surviving Death by almost inspired, but you have seen it. What did you make of that?
I thought it were awful. Yeah.
Did you?
I'm not convinced by it whatsoever. I'm extremely skeptical. But
it's good to have a skeptical mind, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
It's the knowing bit that then you have to get. Now you in a way you know, because you experience that out of body experience, that there's something else.
Yeah, I don't doubt there is paranormal phenomena. I've witnessed other things as well, but I watched that series on Netflix twice. It was made by Leslie Keane.
That's right.
I know Leslie. I sent her an email and told her about my near-death experience and never heard a word. But she's a busy lady. I'm not taking any offence. But I'll give you my ex-wife, I believe, was, I don't like to use the word, but psychic. And we were summoned, or we were asked to go to, I'm not going to give any names away, but to one of the major national newspapers in the UK, to their head office in London, to meet the assistant editor. He wanted to talk about me writing a large feature for the newspaper. So we drove down to London, to their office, security check, badge over your neck. Just wait here, the secretary will come get you. Down she came, we goes up to his office, she gives us a cup of coffee, and then he walks. And he said, have you had lunch yet? And it was about 12:30, so we said, no, we've literally just arrived. He says, come on, we'll go to the dining room, we'll have lunch. He said, there's some others I want you to meet. So we sat around the table with my wife next to me, and there's the picture editor and the feature editor and somebody else. We're chatting away, and my wife, for some reason, was pretty quiet, which was not like her. She was very sociable, she was well knowledgeable about this subject. And then she said to this guy, again, I'm not going to say his name. She said to him, do you know somebody called Josh? And he stuttered and stammered, and he changed, the subject. And after lunch, we went back down to his office, and he wasn't best pleased. He says, who the hell have you been talking to about me? Bearing in mind, again, this is pre-internet days. And I said, nobody, mate. We'd only arrived 2 minutes before you came into the office. And there were tears in his eyes. And he said to my wife, how did you know to use the name Josh? She said, I just saw it across your forehead in big letters, Josh. And she said, I just had to tell you. And he went on to explain that Josh was a girlfriend of his many, many years back. He was in his 50s now, but this was when he was a young man. And he said that wasn't even her real name. It was just a nickname that he had for her. It wasn't even remotely like her name. And I tell you what, I got the deal to write the double page spread in the newspaper, and we've kept in touch ever since, And I've no asked to my wife, the hell did you say that for? I thought they were going to chuck us out. I just saw it and I had to tell him.
Okay, I don't quite know how to reconcile this. It's a great story, by the way, but you're almost highly skeptical when you had a psychic wife. That.
Well, I think these things happen. There is again, I don't like the word, but there is psychic, so paranormal phenomena. I'm just not convinced it's got anything to do with life after death. I may well be wrong. Fair. I may well be wrong, but we shall see. We'll all find out.
I think every one of us will.
We will, won't we, mate?
We're all going to find out at some stage.
So what I'm saying is I don't need no proof that paranormal phenomena exist, because I've had a near-death experience personally, and I witnessed this thing happening with my wife. And she had no idea what it was. She just... she had to do it, and that was it. She saw this, tell him.
Yeah, lovely story, that one. I do love that. Back to the alien stuff. Knowing that the seeming vast majority of people who claim to have abduction cases, they are returned unharmed, what does that tell us?
Well, it tells me we've got nothing to be fearful of, nothing to be frightened of apart from fear itself. It's fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, because that's why, our first book was called Without Consent, because whatever these experiences are, you don't volunteer for it. I looked the word abduction up in a little dictionary, and it said blah 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 blah, without consent. I thought, well, that's it. I'll use
I'll have
that.
Yeah.
I'll have that because you can kind of frame it whichever way you want. So it is the fear of losing control. You have no control over these experiences, even if they, some people might say they're a psychological experience of some kind. That's fine, but you still have no control over them. And I think that's the scariest thing. That for me, I can't do anything about this. We can put extra locks on our doors and windows and stop the burglars getting in. So we can take preventative measures, put an alarm in, join the neighborhood watch. And when it comes to these kind of experiences, none of that makes any difference whatsoever.
No, I agree with you. That concept alone is frightening, isn't it? That there's jack you can do about it.
Well, it's like being scared of the dark, isn't it? There's nothing in it, but nonetheless, you're still afraid of it.
That's true. To you, which cases stand out as the most complete cases, if we could ever say that? And once presented with the evidence, a layperson could only ever come to the conclusion that abduction exists as a phenomenon.
Do you mean in this country or the world at large?
Well, let's go to what you know the best. So let's. You've obviously done a lot of work in this country, so let's start there.
Well, I think the best well-known one in the UK is Police Constable Alan Godfrey. And he was on patrol in his police car in November 1980. He was just finishing his night shift. He'd actually been looking, this was in Todmorden in West Yorkshire. He'd been looking for some cows that had gone missing. And he'd seen an officer on foot patrol down in the town. He said, I'm going to have one last look for these cows, and that's me finished, shift over with. So he's driving up the main street through Todmorden, and he's about to indicate right to go back to the station. And he sees these lights up ahead. What's that? So he carries on driving, and there is an object blocking the road. It's like an old children's spinning top. It's dark coloured. It's just off the ground. It's got a bank of panels or windows on the top, and the bottom half is spinning. And he stops the patrol car, tries to radio to the police station, couldn't get through. So he had a clipboard in the patrol car, so he picks that up, starts to draw this thing. The next thing he knows, he's several hundred yards down the road, now driving the car. He gets back to the police station, he reports it, but he's late. And he couldn't understand why he was late. His police boot had also mysteriously split, the sole underneath, and he had a mark on the instep of his foot, on his ankle, which wasn't there the night before. He reported it later as well, and his boss made him, write out a full report and send it off. It was sent to the Ministry of Defence. Some months later, Alan Godfrey got involved with a number of local UFO researchers. They hired two professional professors in psychiatry to put Alan under regressive hypnosis. And they filmed it. And you see Alan in the patrol car, and then he says, there's a light, and he throws his hands up in front of him to shield his eyes from this light. He talks about being put on a bed. There are these ugly creatures that have a heads shaped like a light bulb. And there's a man there in white robes with a beard and a little skull cap. And he's called Joseph. And, there's a bit more to it, but that's it. And, you speak to Alan and he'll say, look, Philip, that thing on the road, if I'd been an American policeman, I could have got my gun out and shot it. You know, it was that close. As for the hypnosis, you make of it what you will. You know, it is what it is. And Alan had received commendations as a police officer. He was a no-nonsense Bobby type of guy. Would rather give you a telling off than give you a ticket, you know.
Yeah.
And he eventually came out of the police force, but he went public with it. Strangely enough, when the MOD released their files, there is no sign of Alan's reporting them anywhere. You know, it's just not there. But that's the most famous one in the UK. And the last I heard, Alan's getting on in life now. He was working with a screenwriter to turn his story into a movie. I wish him the best of luck. I hope it happens.
Yeah, me too. I would love to see that. Obviously, it never comes close to the original story because they always change things for movies. But how long was he gone for? What was the missing time period?
It was about 15 minutes-ish.
Oh, not too long then.
No, because he knew, he knew approximately it was coming to the end of his shift. So he knew what time it was. But of course, when he got back there, it was late. I mean, it's not like Alan either. You know, he knew the area like the back of his hand. I think the best case for me anywhere in the world is one I've been working on now for 5 years. And it took place on October the 11th, 1973 in Pascagoula, Mississippi.
I was going to ask you about this, yeah.
Yeah, and two local guys, Charles Hickson, who was 42, Calvin Parker, who was 18, had been working in the shipyard that day, and they decided to go fishing after work. So they, plunked themselves on an old pier on the river, start fishing, and they're driven there, and on the way in, they passed a no entry sign, and Calvin wasn't happy about that, and Charlie said, "Don't worry about it." So as they're fishing, this blue light comes from behind them. So Calvin automatically thinks, "I'm going to spend the night in jail for trespassing." It's the police, When they turn round, it's not the police. There's a rugby ball shaped object descending. There's two lights on one end. It stops just a couple of feet off the ground. This opening appears, and the light is really intense that comes out of it. They have to shield their eyes. These three very bizarre humanoid creatures literally levitate out of it, float across towards them. Two gets hold of Charlie, one gets hold of Calvin. They take them into this. They're separated. Calvin said he was placed lying on a glass table. This thing came out of the ceiling. It was about the size of a pack of cards. It went around me as if it was taking pictures or something. A female creature appeared. She said she looked almost human, apart from her middle fingers were a lot longer. She examined him and other things. Charlie, on the other hand, he said he was just suspended in air. He was just floating. And this thing came out of the wall in front of him and went around him. They were both put back, and this thing was gone. So they decided what we're going to do. Calvin was just about to get married, and he said, "We're not telling anybody." I think, well, nuts. My girlfriend's father will never let me marry her. She was only 16, he was 18. He had to have a father's permission. So they set off, but then they have a change of heart. And Calvin says, right, so they go to a convenience store, a payphone. They first of all ring the Air Force Base, Keesler. Charlie had spent some years in the army and had fought in Korea. Keesler Air Force Base said, "We're not interested. Ring your local authorities." So they ring the police. They're patched through to Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Cutting a long story short, they end up in the sheriff's office. They're interviewed. They're given a fair warning. If this is some kind of prank, you guys are in big trouble. Big trouble. They then put both of them together in a room and leave them on their own. Unbeknown to Parker and Hickson, there is a tape recorder in the desk next to them, and it's taping their conversation. The deputy comes back, takes this out. They don't see what it is. "We'll have them now. We'll have them now, Sheriff." They'll be laughing and joking at us, but of course they're not. Calvin's crawling up the wall. So the sheriff and his deputies tend them to believe them. So they go home, and they go back to work the next morning. Nobody will know about it. We haven't told anybody. As they get there, they're summoned to the boss's office. He said, what the hell have you guys been up to? The phones are ringing off your hook. The story had got out somehow. So they tell their boss. They're then sent to the hospital for an exam. They're then taken to Keesler Air Force Base to be checked for radiation. Bear in mind, Keesler was the first place to run the night before. They check for radiation, there's nothing. They said, why are you here, guys? Why don't you come and tell us what happened? So they do. And that's recorded as well, but this time with a stenographer, not on a tape. They had a stenographer work there. And the story was out, and the following day, two professors arrived, Dr. James Harder and Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek is the close encounters man.
Yeah. They
talk to everybody, they speak to the guy. Harder even puts Calvin under hypnosis. And they hold a press conference and say, these gentlemen are the genuine article. And off they go. But, they're hounded by the press. Calvin goes home. Because he didn't actually live there. He lived 150 miles away near Laurel in Mississippi. He ends up in the hospital. And Charlie Hickson's ends up going on the Dick Cavett show, the biggest talk show of its time in the USA. And the rest, as they say, is history. I've been working with a lady by the name of Dr. Irina Scott. We have uncovered a mountain of new information, new witnesses, hypnosis tapes, even a man and a wife who were on the other side of the river that night who say, we saw what happened to Charlie and Calvin, and guess what? It happened to us as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. This is a big treasure trove, is it, of supplementary evidence that backs it all up?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot. There were a couple of witnesses at the time, back in 1973, but we've traced a number of other ones, or some have stepped forward. I published Calvin's book in 2018. It's called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter. They saw him being treated with respect on the television and in newspapers, whereas back in 1973, it was all a big laugh, So they were of an age where they couldn't care less. Well, I saw that thing, now I'm going to tell my story. Now that Calvin's told his and he's been, treated with respect, I'm going to tell mine. Others we found, quite by chance. We found a lot of documentary evidence from that date. Still are finding it, I've been working on it. So we published all of that in our book, Dr. Irina Scott and I. It's called Beyond Reasonable Doubt, The Pascagoula Alien Abduction. That came out last October. But since then, more witnesses have come forward. More documentary evidence has been located. We found a number of recordings from 1973 that were done in and around that time. And I've been busy transcribing them all for publication next year.
Is there anything, I mean, you don't have to give us the information because obviously it's going to go into a book or whatever, but is there anything there that astounds you in relation to?
I don't think it astounds me. It for me, it further cements the case itself. For example, we have the tape recording of Charles Hickson that night in the sheriff's office telling his story.
That's cool.
And we then also have the secret tape of the guys being recorded on the QT. I have for the first time Calvin Parker's hypnosis done on October the 14th, 1973 by Dr. James Harder. And it's only 11 minutes long, but it's quite spooky in parts. Dr. Harder says, Calvin, what did these creatures look like? And he says, in a very low voice, they look like ghosts.
Oh,
and it does, it does creep you out when you listen to it. Then we have Dr. Harder holding a press conference, so his questions are being fired and he's replying. We also have Dr. Hynek interviewing the Sheriff Fred Diamond. Never heard these before, none whatsoever. Another recording we just obtained, Charlie Hickson took a polygraph test on October the 30th, so just a couple of weeks later. And we have the sheriff on the local news reading out the results from the polygraph examiner. It was a chap by the name of Scott Glasgow. And he said, after a 2.5 hour polygraph exam, the guy's telling the truth, in my opinion, you know. So we have the recording of that on the local radio. Never heard it before, ever. And I told you about the Dick Cavett show.
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with the case as such, but we can't find the video of it. But I've actually got the audio of it. And I'm literally just about to transcribe it, because what it does, it emphasizes the enormity of the case when it took off. How, you know, this was the biggest talk show in America at the time. It was a bit like Mark and Parkinson was here.
Yeah, yeah.
And lo and behold, who's on it? You know, Charlie Hickson from Pascagoula. You know?
Yeah, big case. Obviously, you've got then the physical evidence, haven't you? What with the radiation side of things.
What we do have.
Got landing traces.
No, we got marks on the two men, minor injuries. So when you go back and review what they said at the time, they talked about being scratched and what have you. Calvin said on board this thing, they removed his lower clothing and his shoes and socks, and they stuck something in his foot, and it hurt. And I obtained a file from the Center for UFO Studies, which was set up by Mr. Hynek, Dr. Hynek himself. In the middle of the file is a one-page typewritten document called puncture wounds. And it talks of, and this is October the 13th, so it's 2 days after the event, that Charlie and Calvin were stripped down to their underwear. They were given the once over, and Charlie had, in quotes, puncture wounds on his forearm and Calvin on his foot. And it mentions that photographs were taken. So the document itself is kind of confirming what Charlie and Calvin said, but no photos. About a year or so later, the gentleman who sent me that file sent me an email. So, Philip, I've been going through some files today. I wasn't looking for these, but I've come across them. I assume you've already got them, mate. Here you go. Hey, presto, it is the photographs of their marks. And I'll be the first one, but they are only minor injuries. They're scratches. But nonetheless, they talked about them back in 1973. We have a document, you know, in writing, talking about seeing them. And then we have these photographs. And I asked Calvin, Tony Calvin passed away last year. I asked him at the time, who the hell checked you over? He said, well, Dr. Harder did. He wasn't an MD, but he had the presence of mind to say, you know, did they hurt you anywhere? And oh yeah, my arm and my foot. Well, let's have a look then, gents. You know, just made common sense to me.
Yeah, me
you know,
too.
They were all adults. There were no females involved. You know, we weren't doing anything incorrect, so to speak. So we have this physical evidence, which we've published in our book Beyond Reasonable Doubt, and the photographs for the very first time, and they are what they are. You know, and the document.
Yeah, well, that's what makes it then so astounding, isn't it? We've got physical evidence, we've got the anecdotes from them, we've got the police interviews and all that stuff. Now you've got the extra supplementary witnesses saying they also saw the craft, etc., etc.
Yeah.
If you did look at all that as a whole, what else could you conclude?
I mean, what we did in the last book, you say, we had a different title for it, and I was watching a courtroom drama one night. You know, and they said, oh, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this man is innocent or whatever. And I thought, that's the title. I emailed my colleague and co-author, Dr. Arena Scott. She said, yeah. So what we argue, if you were to take everything that's in our book, all the testimony, all the photographs, documents, witnesses, etc., 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 if we could take that into a court, in our humble opinion, we could prove that something quite extraordinary happened that night. But exactly what is a different matter, you know, and we allow the reader to be the jury, if you like. You know, you buy the book, you decide for yourself once you've read it all. And like I've said, that came out last October, but more information, these new recordings have come to light, and various other documents that I'm working on now. And the only thing we don't have is photographic evidence from the night. You know, somebody didn't say, oh, I took a photograph of the thing, or I filmed it. There were, I think we're up to 4 or 5 people who claimed where the UFO came down, it was like a bald patch in the area. But right next to it, they have grass. But the grass there is 6-7 foot tall, you know. And I think we have 4 or 5 people who say that they saw damage to the vegetation, shall we say. You know, one young lad, he says, on a Saturday morning, he says, my mum and dad used to have a sleep in. And I was allowed to get up and watch cartoons. He said, we'd seen the alien thing on the TV Friday night, and I knew where it happened. So he said, I get up Saturday morning, mum and dad's asleep. I get on my bicycle, I go and get my mate, and we pedal to where this location happened. He said, we made our way through this long grass. He said, we know there's nothing going to hurt you. And he said, we came to a section where the grass was just gone. It hadn't been set on fire. I couldn't see if he chopped it down where they dumped it. It just wasn't there. And we had another young fella. He was, where this incident happened on the river, there are 2 bridges. And one of them was a drawbridge. And the traffic goes over it. I'm in the car with mum and dad, look down, and there's a big hole in the grass. So whether there was anything at the location is open to debate, but we have 4 or 5 people saying that they saw damage to the vegetation, but not actually at the spot where it happened.
Yeah, almost like the ghost of evidence or the shadow of evidence, what I mean?
Point you in that direction. What we've done is to look, these people have made these statements. It's not just one person. I mean, one chap, he said, I'll go back to the area now, Philip, and I'll stand in front of the grass. It still grows there. And take some photos just to show you how tall it is. And he did, and we're very grateful for that. But it is the almost perfect case. There is no such thing as perfect case, but this is as good as it gets, I reckon,
Let's branch into territory that I know you can't give concrete scientific answers for, but I'm always intrigued by what your mind can conceive. So let's go with, what do you think the motive is for it? Because if they take people and then just sort of do a cursory exam and then bring people back theoretically 100% unharmed, what are they doing?
Yeah, well, we're assuming that there were aliens in the first place, or beings not of this world. I've been publishing books at Flying Disc Press now since 2015. The second book I did was from a chap in Romania, believe it or not. I went on to publish another book of his. It's called Dr. Dan Farkas. And I published his book. It's called Hypercivilizations. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he's wrong, but it just made me think a little. Dr. Farkas stated that, yes, we are being visited, but the visitors are so far in advance of us. He said, I'm not talking thousands of years. I'm not even talking millions. I'm talking, eons in front of us. That there is no way that we as a species could ever figure out what the hell is going on. He said, for example, if you took a flat screen television and stuck it in an ant's nest, the ants would know there was something there. They'd crawl all over it. Remember the soldier ants might even attack it. But never in a billion years will we be able to figure out what the hell it is, what it's made of, and where it came from, and what its purpose is. So he says maybe on an intergalactic scale, we are the ants, and the answer is there in front of us, but just we're too dumb as a species to try and figure it out. And I don't like that. Well, it just made me think. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he's wrong. It was just another way of looking at it. I have another colleague was extremely skeptical of the aliens idea. And he said, look, Philip, if you go back in time, mankind has always had strange experiences. With the early shamans, the fairy folk, whatever, And he says, we've all interpreted it in our own culture. So it has cultural influences. So it's got nothing to do with aliens. It's something that's always been here on Earth that we've interacted with. And he's not talking about other beings or spirits, but it's some kind of phenomena that is is generated by the earth itself, for want of a better phrase, a better way of explaining it. And when we interact with it, some of us will have a strange experience, others don't. You know, it's like when you get a pack of pills from the doctor, take the information out and it'll tell you of the possible side effects. Some people will have those side effects. Some people won't. Why the hell is that? So as it's like coming into contact with this phenomena, some of us will have a bizarre experience, others will just carry on as normal and have no effect on them, whatever. But it's always been here, and it's got nothing to do with aliens from anywhere.
I don't know where to put my mind, because I know if you're like me, you want answers, and a mystery is always that piece of tape on the wall that you want to pick off so that you can see the answer. And it's hard to know if you did that big TV on the ant's nest thing, that we'll never get to the answer, because we're never going to be evolved enough within our time frame to be able to see the television and understand it. That's so frustrating.
It is. Yeah, I'm not saying it's right though. I'm just saying it's just
it could be.
It's just an idea. So another way of looking at it. I think, our aliens coming here and visiting us is a very simplistic answer.
Yeah.
It's when I say the phenomenon, I mean paranormal phenomena en masse. I think is far more complex than people would have us believe. And I believe it is all interconnected.
Yes,
they are different sides of the same coin, so to speak. Because again, if you go back to the study that Eddie Bullard did, like you mentioned, if you take out the parameters of a lot of the near-death experiences, I would hazard a guess that they are very similar, if not the same kind of parameters that you experience in an alien abduction experience.
Yeah.
And of course, some people will have a paranormal experiences while his mate next to him won't. Give you a good example about what I'm talking about. Probably the most famous case in Britain are the events in December 1980 at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in Rendlesham Forest. For those that are not aware, there's a number of events happened over a number of nights. On the first night, lights were seen to descend into the forest, into Rendlesham Forest. They dispatched 3 military people from the nuclear facility. These were professional guards, and 1 stayed with the vehicle, 2 went into the forest. That was John Burroughs, and I forget his other friend.
Peniston, probably.
Jim Peniston. Yes. Jim Peniston. So they go in, and they claim they got close to whatever it was. They got close to it. Now, Jim Peniston was a sergeant at the time. He said he saw this triangular shaped object just off the ground. It was dark coloured. And he said he went up, touched it. It was warm. He noticed these markings down the side of it. He walked around it. And he said all of this took him about 45 minutes. John Burroughs is standing a few yards away. He said, I never saw any of that. I just saw some lights. How do you get that?
I don't know.
I believe both gentlemen, they did have a very bizarre experience, but whatever they encountered, it affected them differently. One sees a craft, and they said, I just saw these lights. So if it is something that is natural, earthbound, and has always been here, like my friend says, when you experience it, some will have an experience, others don't. And that will be the same in ghosts and other forms of paranormal phenomena. But, I've spoken to John Burroughs. I interviewed him on the telephone some years back, and I have no reason to disbelieve them at all. But so it's not as simple and as straightforward as it looks. People forget this,
Yeah, no, I don't think it is a straightforward thing. I think it is a big overlapping of ghosts, aliens, and all these phenomena together that muddies the waters. The interesting thing to consider is whether it's the human receiving differently, or whether it's them, or whatever the phenomena is, projecting differently. One of those kind of has to be true.
Well, I would say the foremost of those, but that's just an opinion. I could be entirely wrong. I mean, let's be honest. We'd all love it to be aliens.
Yes.
Even the debunkers and the skeptics would love to say, I'm wrong. You know, we're not alone in the universe. Aliens have visited Earth. You know, because it's the most romantic notion. We'd love to say, you know, ghosts are spirits of people that have passed on, and we go to a better place. The physical body will die, but the spiritual body lives on somewhere else. That would be great. But it would be great, but it don't mean it's real, does it? It don't mean that's
No.
the answer.
What have you got there? Is that a Coke or a Pepsi or Dandelion and Burdock?
That's just Coke.
Ah, good man.
There's no spirits in it.
Indeed. Now, getting back to the Godfrey case, a silly question, but do we know what happened to those cows?
Alan said they were found
Good.
later that day in a park, but the park gates were locked. So how the hell did they get in there?
That's weird. That adds a bit of extra weirdness to it then, doesn't it?
Here's one little thing I forgot to mention about his hypnosis. During his hypnosis, Tony Allen saw these little creatures with the bulbous heads. This man, and he also said, saw a black dog.
I'm glad you said that.
A black dog. And now, I dare say you may well know of the significance of the black dog in folklore. And
I actually don't, but I want to touch on animals in a second.
Well, I'll give you an example. There's various references to phantom dogs. Werewolves are phantom dogs, you know. But also, for example, Sir Winston Churchill, he suffered from depression. You know what he called it? The black dog. So, phantom hounds, the Hounds of the Baskerville was a phantom hound, you know. So there are lots of stories of phantom dogs throughout folklore, all have a paranormal link. And I give you a first-hand account of this. A colleague and I got a letter from a fellow up in North Yorkshire, up in the Dales. Said he'd seen these UFOs over the fells. So we contacted him because we'll come and have a chat with you. I said, okay. So we made an appointment. Off we goes. He lived in such and such a village. And when we got there, we got this letter, and he lived at number 6 or whatever. You and I wouldn't call it a village. It was just a few houses. And there was no numbers on the doors either. So we didn't know which door to go to. So we went and knocked on the first one. And this lady came to the door and I says, excuse me, madam, could you tell us where, Mr. Brown lives? And she says, have you come about the ghost dog? And I said, no. And she told us the story where every now and again you get these 2 red eyes would float down through the village. And these were the eyes of the ghost dog. But in reality, all they were seeing is 2 little balls of light. But their culture, their folklore imparted a different story onto it. That was the ghost dog. So in Alan Godfrey's hypnosis session, he says there's a black dog. Make of that what you will.
Oh, I know, because it throws me into a mind spin in that, was it a representation of, say, depression, as an example, like an element of his character at that point? Was it a real ghost of a black dog, or was it something different, a portent of something? I don't know.
Who knows? But it's very different, and it's not the kind of thing I think you'd make up. But I don't know. It's just a little oddity that a lot of people forget when they write about Alan. I would guarantee that if they ever get the movie made, and I've spoken to the writer, and he's also a director, I would guarantee there's no mention of a black dog in it anywhere. But it is what it is. Alan's not afraid of telling the story.
Well, you can only say it how it is. You should say the truth.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. They probably also cut out the bearded man with a skull cap, because that is also kind of an anomaly, isn't it?
It is, and his name. He has a name called Joseph.
Joseph, yeah. How very strange. That black dog thing that actually did lead me back to a question that I wanted to ask, which is, do we have any cases of animal abductions themselves?
Well, not that I'm aware of. I mean, animals go missing all the time. You wouldn't think twice about it, would you? There's some people claim that there are animal mutilations that have something to do with UFOs. I am personally not convinced. However, it's not something I've ever dealt with. So I'd rather not comment on it because it's not my area of expertise.
Okay, so let's attack it from a slightly different angle then. So is there anyone in case file history that has reported also seeing a dog with abductees on a ship?
I was told of this recently. I did an interview with somebody and he quoted another few instances. I can't remember which cases they were. We have cases where the dog or an animal nearby has allegedly been affected by the presence of a UFO, does a tailspin or starts whooping and hollering or whatever, so, there are effects on animals. And as we know, animals can hear in different frequencies to us, or they have a better sense of smell and such and such. It makes you wonder how the hell we've reached the top of the food chain sometimes when you talk about the senses of, your dog next to you has, but not that I'm aware of, but a gentleman did tell me a couple of other instances that he was aware of.
Okay, it's one for the future mind, that one.
Yeah. Well, it's not, if you think about it, like I said with abductees, and say, did anything happen to you afterwards? Like the artistic or environmental issues, maybe that should be a question to be asked as well. You see any animals at the time? You've got to be careful not to ask in a leading way. Which is very, very difficult. Sorry for interrupting. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And the other question I wanted to ask, based on the Pascagoula case, was what stock do you put in hypnotic regression? Because I've spoken to a number of people, actual regression therapists themselves, like Barbara Lamott, etc., and they know it's getting to what they would call the truth. But then I've also spoken to the other side, who say, we're implanted that evidence into the mind. Where would you sit on it?
I think it's somewhere in between the two. What is interesting, and I only found it the other day, like I said, within 2 days of the event in Pascagoula, both Hickson and Parker were put under hypnosis by Dr. James Harder. We only have the recording of Calvin's hypnosis. What I have just located is a letter that James Harder wrote. And there's one interesting little bit about his hypnotism with Parker and Hickson. He said, we didn't learn anything new that we already knew before the hypnosis. So they'd already told him what happened to them, right? So he puts them under hypnosis and they tell him the same story again.
I see.
And I asked Calvin Parker, because Calvin had had a number of hypnosis sessions since then. I said, was the hypnosis of any use to you, Calvin? And he says, not really, no. He says, I remembered it all anyway. So even if we were to take some cases that rely purely on hypnotic testimony, if we were to throw them out, just for sake of argument, we still have all these other cases where they can remember everything and have never used hypnosis. What is interesting is that at times, if you take hypnotic testimony and full conscious testimony, put them side by side, they don't really differ that much, So I would say it depends on the individual. Like we've said, it is almost impossible not to ask a leading question. By the very fact that you are there is already a leading question. You're the UFO investigator speaking to the witness, so they've already got UFOs in the mind. What we did,
that's true.
For example, the lady who was on the opposite side of the Pascagoula River that night is called Mrs. Maria Blair. She said, we saw what happened to Charlie and Calvin, and we too had an encounter. She only remembered snippets of it. Her husband told her the rest. Her husband died, and she asked to undergo hypnosis. We turned her down. She asked again. So we hired a local hypnotherapist, a professional, nothing to do with the paranormal, set the hypnosis up, told her nothing. So all the hypnotherapist knew was that Maria wants to go back to a location at this date and at this time. And she put her under hypnosis. We had it filmed as well, professionally filmed. And when Maria starts talking about this, you want to see the look on the hypnotherapist's face, because she had no idea what the subject matter was, you know. And she's sat, Maria's laid out on the settee and she's sat at the end of the chair and her face going, what? But we told her nothing, absolutely nothing, So, but like I say, it's very difficult then not to ask leading questions,
But that person almost wouldn't ask pre-loaded questions in her head, would she? Because if she had no idea, yeah.
No, and she was just, I went online. I found a number of hypnotherapists in the area. I emailed them all, didn't tell them what. I just told them we're looking for, hypnosis. And they come back, yeah. And then I'd ask them the second question: do you do the aggressive hypnosis? I found two, and we ended up with one, a young lady. So there was no information whatsoever. But that's very difficult. That's an unusual scenario, But again, in our book, we've put Maria's hypnotic testimony in full. It's all transcribed, so you can compare it with what she told us beforehand. So we have her and her husband's story beforehand, then her hypnosis, and you can compare the two. Make your own mind up.
Was her story similar to Calvin and Charlie then, in that they were taken as well, or?
Yeah.
Wow.
What happened was, she thought she just had a sighting of this blue thing, and she saw this creature in the water. And her husband was going offshore to work for a few days. And then they see Charlie and Calvin on the TV the next day. She said, oh my God, I saw that last night. She thought this was men doing it. She thought it's some kind of men messing about. And her husband says, don't say a word. When he came back, do not tell anybody. Now, what happened was, when Calvin wrote his first book, he was interviewed by a local journalist who made a little 8-minute, mini doc of him. And when the article went online, you could access this little mini documentary. There's, Calvin sat in his house, chatting away, going down by the river, showing it where it all happened. Somebody grabbed that and put it on YouTube. I'm reading the comments underneath it, and this person said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFOs. I thought, I found that person. She was a young lady. And I said, can we speak to your mum and dad? I explained who I was. And she came back and said, yeah, they will talk to you. And that was Mr. and Mrs. Blair. What they explained to us was that, I spoke to Mr. Blair. He was, how can I say it? He was grumpy. Maria, said she talked about seeing this creature in the water as well. So time passed. My colleague, Dr. Irina Scott, kept in touch constantly with Maria and Jerry. And then Jerry took seriously ill. I mean, seriously ill.
Okay.
He was going to have a minor operation. And he wasn't even sure if he was going to survive that. So he insisted from his hospital bed that his wife call me on the mobile phone. And he told me straight, I saw the same as my wife. I saw the grey humanoids in the water. I saw him going back across the water. Thankfully, he survived this mini operation, but it was only a temporary fix. He was on his way out, sadly. So he told his wife, Maria, that night on the river, all those little glimpses of things you had, you couldn't make sense of. Well, we too had an abduction experience, and he explained it to her. And as ill as he was, Maria gave him what for. She said, you've got some talking to do. So it was almost like a deathbed confession.
Yeah.
But it took, I don't think he died. He didn't die straight away. It was a few days or a few weeks later that he passed away. And he also had Maria, his wife, film him on her phone while he sat in the hospital bed with the stickers still on him from his ECG, And he said, I saw it, Philip. I saw the UFO, the humanoids. And we have that film.
Cool. I have a question formulating, which is about an alien in the water. I haven't heard of that before, aliens interacting with the water, other than that, I think, Shag Harbor one. But does the lady who saw them in the water, did she see the movement of water around the alien, meaning it was physically in the water
Oh,
rather than
absolutely.
ghosting through it?
What she said was that what was she'd seen what was happening on the other side of the river. She thought it was men, you know.
Always men.
Yeah. Now her husband Jerry, they were sat there waiting. There was a little boat there, and he was going out into the oil rigs in the Gulf, but his boss was late. So, he had a little sleep in the car. I wasn't in the best of moods. She said it was around about 9 o'clock. They decided to go down onto this little pier and take his belongings out to put them on the boat. And she says, well, it's dark. They're just walking along, and all of a sudden, she says, there's this big splash in the water next to me. And this creature came up out of the water onto the pier, and he's literally there in front of her. I don't mean here, I mean literally. And she called it the grey man. She said it went back into the water. I saw it go underneath, and she said I was waiting for it coming back up, but it didn't. So she ran like mad, threw her husband's stuff onto the boat, and then she legged it back down the pier, back to the car, but now it was 12 o'clock. So where did this 3 hours go?
I don't know, and I know you can't tell me either.
Weird, and when I first spoke to Maria on the phone, bear in mind they hadn't come forward. It was her daughter, was this young lady who made the YouTube comment. They'd only told her two daughters about seeing the UFO, not the other stuff. And Maria said to me, Philip, I often wondered if something similar hasn't happened to us that did to Charlie and Calvin. I said, why do you say that? And she says, I can see things out of my peripheral vision. I can see these little things, and I can't. And she was very emotional about it. And of course, when her husband started telling her about these things, that it all kind of made sense. It wasn't out of her peripheral. This creature was stood in front of her, and she had her eyes closed, and she was squinting. So these are the little things she saw because she didn't have her eyes open. And again, make it what you will. Back end of last year, I had Maria interviewed on camera in the States, and I was able to put some questions to her. And she categorically said, I saw what happened to Charlie and Calvin, And then I can only publish that. And I've got them, I've got it recorded as well, of course. And people can make their own judgment. Maria's not after any money or anything like that. She'll not turn any down if you want to give her some. Her husband's died. She's working hard to keep her, to keep food on the table. But she met Calvin. She became, on friendly terms with him. And Calvin felt vindicated because, like I told you so.
Yeah.
Back in 1973, all you wanted to do was take the mickey out of us. Well, now we have all these other people. And when I say all, we've interviewed 30 plus people from in and around the area over those few nights. And I told you now you might believe me. He still doesn't know what the hell happened to him, but he's grateful that somebody else was witness to it or witness to part of it, so to speak.
Yeah. So we have all this evidence pointing to the fact that an event happened. They can't say 100% what it was, but we know an event happened. That's amazing in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, the investigation is continuing. And that sentence by Dr. Harder about the hypnosis with Charlie and Calvin, he said under hypnosis, they didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know. So I think that's important.
That is telling, yeah.
And of course, there are lots of cases that I told you about the young guy down in Wales, David. He had an encounter and he started writing the spontaneous poetry. Well, I kept in touch with him for a few years, and he remembered everything. He said, Philip, it scared me so much I had to have hypnotherapy to try and get rid of the nightmares I had about it, not regressive hypnosis. He remembered it instantly, So there is a body of evidence where hypnosis has not been used at all. Some people might think that, I can tell you that hypnosis is of no use because it taps into your fantasies, your dreams, Okay, well, let's accept that. What about all these other cases where there is no hypnosis? How the hell do you explain them, clever clogs? You know, it's not that easy, is it?
No, no, there's not one magic pill that kills all this. These stories don't go away,
Oh,
which tells you
absolutely.
there's something
I
to
mean,
it.
we know that most UFO sightings that are reported have a conventional explanation, but it doesn't mean you can use the planet Venus to just say they're all explained. You know,
Certainly.
I wish it was that easy, but it's not.
No, it's not. There's something to this phenomenon, and I'd love to find the answers, and I know you would as well. Your book, UFO Landings UK, I know we mentioned, or you mentioned it earlier. It's got me intrigued. Now, I know a few of these cases. How many did you collate for that book, or
Oh
and was
God.
there more that you didn't even put into it?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never counted them, but there's certainly dozens. And literally, it goes
Hmm.
back to pre-1947, right the way through to modern times, and from all over the UK, even local to me here. It was a local one to me here back in the 80s that got me interested in that type of case. And just by chance, over the last few years, it involved several young children. They're now grown up. I managed to reconnect with a couple of them. And they told me this confirmed the story all over again, because I'd interviewed them back in the 1980s, you know. But there's a lot. And there aren't any that I didn't put in, but there is some quite bizarre instances in it. And I mean, very bizarre. And I pondered whether I should, but you know, that old saying, publish and be damned. So I did.
Yeah. Can you quickly reel off one that you think is really bizarre from that book?
There's one on the Isle of Wight. I can't remember the date, and it involves a couple of a brother and sister. And they hear this noise, and they chase after it. And they encounter this being. And it is the most bizarre thing you have ever seen. It's like a little man made of felt. He's called the Clown, and he's humanoid, and he talks to them through a microphone.
That is
It's
bizarre.
almost like a karaoke,
Hmm.
you know, but this is back in the 70s, I think, or the 80s. I can't remember the exact date. And he takes them to his hut, in inverted commas, and there's a hut there with these weird things in it. And it is extremely bizarre. The case was investigated by a chap called Norman Oliver at Bulfora. Norman died, it was last year, the year before. And he donated all his files to the Archives for the Unexplained in Sweden. It just so happened that when they were come to collect the files, they took some photos, and that file on that case was on the top of this pile of stuff. So I asked them if I could have a copy. And they said, sure, Philip, you know, they digitized it for me and I have it. So we've entered into a tentative agreement with the Archives for the Unexplained. They have the biggest collection of archive material in the world, UFOs, 14, paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
And we've published this case, the Isle of Wight entity, and any funds from it will partly go to the AFU, because it's all volunteers, there is no paid staff, and the collection they've got is amazing. So that case is, you can actually download, you can download it as a Kindle, or you can buy a little paperback of it. And it's just got an introduction from me, briefly telling you what the case is. Then you've got the whole case file. Some of it's a bit hard to read because it's handwriting. Well, I don't think a lot of people are used to reading handwriting today. I know I struggle, you know, but it is and I chose it because it is so bizarre. But there it is, you know, there it is. Make of it what you will.
The clown felt man with a microphone. Yeah, that is an
Yeah,
oddie, isn't it?
you'll find another one.
Yeah, I've never seen another clown felt man case. No,
And
that
that's
is
on the
odd.
Isle of Wight. That's the Isle of Wight here in the UK. It's very bizarre.
That does sound proper odd. Now, UFO landings in and of itself, let's almost try to exclude landings for abduction purposes, right? If there are such a thing. Are they landing just to say, hey, look, we're here? Or are they landed, you think, for technical reasons, like, I don't know, refueling or whatever?
Again, we're assuming this is a physical phenomenon or beings from somewhere else. The local one that I talked about here is a town called Normanton. It's just a couple of miles down the M62. And I got a call from a lady called Mrs. Westerman, way back in the 1980s. I've seen this thing land. And it's shaped like a Mexican hat. And it's gone. And she had, I think, 3 or 4 children and a couple of their friends who were playing a ball game in the street. It was just after lunch. And one of them come running in. She was washing the dishes at the time. Mum, there's an airplane crashed in the field. So you've got a little cul-de-sac of houses and the fields beyond it and some electricity pylons. She goes out. She says, I could see this thing on the ground. She got the kids. Off she goes. There was a little dip there at the time. It's not there now, but she says, I went down this little dip, come up the other side. There's now 3 men, all in white, all white boiler suits, the visor over their face and whacking something over the ground. Kids want to run on and she holds them back. They go to the rear of this thing. Some lovely summer's day, it rises, stops in the air and shoots off at an angle. Didn't make a sound. She never called it a spaceship or spacemen or aliens. We even interviewed one of the children's friends. He'd gone home for his lunch. By the time he come back, he'd missed all the excitement. And he was not happy. He was not happy. And she said, sat down, this is going to be on, because the M62 motorway runs right past Normanton. It's the busiest motorway in the northwest. Runs from, as you probably know, from Hull right across the way to Liverpool, from one side of the country to the other. There's thousands of cars go past there. It was a busy day, the sun's shining, people are out. So I sit down to watch the TV news. They'll be on there tonight. Nothing. She bought the local newspaper. Nothing. She even asked some of her neighbours. And she says, I thought I was a bit odd, even though I'd known them all these years. And nobody'd seen a thing. Nobody. There was no marks there. And she said it was almost if you had to be there at that time to have seen it. I didn't say that. So I don't know is the answer. It is very bizarre. We've run the story a couple of times in the local press down the years to see if anyone else would be tempted to come forward. They haven't done so far. Doesn't mean there aren't people out there that did see something. And like I said, just over the last 2 or 3 years, I got in touch with 2 of the children now grown up, and they recounted it all again and remembered it all. But here's where you have to be careful. When I went to speak to Mrs. Westerman, I went with a colleague. We had our, kit bags with us, our briefcases, whatever. We sat and interviewed the children. My colleague Mark Burse also did some drawings while I was there, based on what they were telling him. One of the youngsters there, I was speaking, she don't live in the area now. She was actually living in Cornwall when I spoke to her. And she says, you have to know this, Philip, 2 scientists came and interviewed everybody. And I thought, there weren't 2 scientists. The only 2 people that came and interviewed you were me and Mark. Now, if she tells that to someone else, that 2 scientists turned up, you then get the conspiracy angle running. Quite by accident, she was sincere in what she meant, but the 2 scientists were me and Mark Birdsall, and I guarantee you we're not scientists and never will be. So,
you didn't have your white coat on that day, no?
Not that day, no. No, I didn't get the stethoscope out or anything like that, But so it just shows you have to be careful as well.
Yes, amazing. Now, I want to also touch on one of the books you co-wrote with Paul Stonehill, Russia's Roswell incident. Can you give us a synopsis of this case, and how is it in some ways better than the actual Roswell crash?
I don't know if it's any better, but back in the 80s, there's a place called Dalmagorsk in the northern part of Russia. It has a hill. The hill was known affectionately as Height 611.
Typical Russian name, yeah.
Yeah, Height 611. And the town of Dalmagorsk was rich in minerals, mines and things like that there. So, and something hit the hillside one night. And it lit up the place. The locals investigated it. And there were eyewitnesses to it as well. They found little shards of material. Some was a bit like mesh. There were little round balls, some of which they took. Part of the mountainside was still smoking when investigators were on site. And then I don't know if it was the day after or a couple of days after the Soviet military came in helicopters, and it was, more or less forgotten about. But you have to remember there was a time in the Soviet Union that UFOs was a banned subject. So you weren't allowed to openly study it. Anyway, a number of people did study it. These materials were analysed, and some people claimed they were common, others that they were exotic, and the argument went on and still is going on to this very day. Last year, I got in touch with a gentleman in Russia, a Russian researcher, and without mentioning the war there, he was trying to get out of there. He didn't want to get drafted. But what had happened was one of the main researchers up in Dalnogorsk had passed away, and he got boxes of files. So I'm trying to get my hands on these files, but sadly, so far, not been able to do. But what we did get hold of was another photograph of this material. Some of it was kept in a box. And we got new photographs of it, because we already had some. So here it is, and this, George sent me this photograph. It's not fake, not from anywhere else. What is interesting, I can't remember exactly how many years ago it is, but 2, 3, 4 years ago, there was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that's where they have the Atomic Bomb Museum. And they had a display on there. And on display was a piece of this material from Dalnogorsk. And the placard with it says, real UFO material. And that was at the Atomic Bomb Museum in Albuquerque.
Which throws up the question, why?
Exactly. I wrote to them, never got an answer. I have a photograph of it on display. You can't make it out clearly, but you can make out the placard and what have you. Mm-hmm. So that case is going in another book I'm writing for next year, because we've updated it. And my colleague out there, George, was desperate to get. In fact, it must be a couple of years ago, because I was speaking to him prior to the war in the Ukraine. He was desperate to get his hands on these files, because rumor had it they were going to be split up, and he said, they really should be all kept together. So my idea was, you get your hands on them, George, and if there's enough evidence in it, there's a book there for you. He speaks good English, he writes excellent English, but circumstances have changed. We're not able to get hold of them. But some did make it to the West, because they had one piece in Albuquerque at the Atomic Bomb Museum, and I have a picture of it. So again, that's something that is ongoing. It's not dead. There's bits of this stuff out there. And were it not for the war in the Ukraine, we may have learned some more from these files that are, from a deceased researcher. So I've worked with Paul Stonehill a lot in the United States. Paul is originally from the Ukraine, so he speaks and reads and writes Russian. So there's no problem if we need things translating, document-wise. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But again, it's a fascinating little. We've called it the Russia's Roswell because it's a sales thing.
Okay, fair enough.
Well, it is. But it's an intriguing little case. Something happened there. There's no doubt about that. We've got photographs of the hillside, with the damage there and things of this nature. People on site, and again, was it ours? Was it the Soviet military? Something go wrong and they've blown the top of the mountain off, which wouldn't surprise you, would it?
No,
let's be honest. Was it an accident of some kind? Who knows? But again, I think there's enough information to say something bizarre, something certainly happened there. It's not just a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Did you hear about that?
So you think there's a lot more to come out about this one, and it could go in?
Well, and
are you aware of directions it can go that you think, oh, that's really interesting?
We were told that the guy who passed away was one of the main researchers up in that area. He had 3 boxes of documents.
Okay.
So, I'm assuming they would be of sufficient interest, and we could learn more, even if it's just interviews with people or photographs. It's all relevant. So we'll see how things go.
See how that one parses out. Yeah. Now, do you think there are loads more cases of crashes around the world, but we in the West just haven't heard of them? So they could be famous cases in like China or whatever, but we just don't know of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's cases everywhere that we're not aware of. Like when I started investigating the Pascagoula case, it was well known, but the case itself was dead. You know, it was. I mean, when I tried to find Calvin, I went to researchers in Mississippi. What an obvious place to start. They'd never heard of the case, which amazed me. But we've learned more about the case since then than we did in the previous 45 years. So, because there is things lying around, if we only ask, if we only look. It's not just about what the witness has to say, you know, what's in next door neighbor's filing cabinet, what's in the basement. We found stuff from the most unlikely of places. For example, back in 1973, when this happened, Dr. James Harder was there. Harder was a scientific consultant to the main UFO group, which was called APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. They sent him down there. APRO had approximately 15,000 files. They closed in there, I think it was in the 80s. But the files were held by a man and a woman down in Arizona, and they would not allow anyone access to them. I contacted them. They were very nice. The lady died. I left the fella. And again, I'm saying, look, you know, anything on the Pascagoula case, James Harder, surely there must be something. So I can't find anything for it. Fair enough. Now, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there is a gentleman by the name of David Marler. He's the executive director of the National UFO Historical Record Center. And at the end of last year, got a message from this gentleman down in Arizona. How would you like the APRO files? He came up to see David and his layout, you know, what he got. You can have them free of charge. I want it all done legally, so they're drafted in a legal document. The gentleman even brought them himself, although David and his colleagues paid for the hire of a van and petrol and so on. And he got the whole lot, plus boxes of films and stuff. Now, I've known David for a number of years. It was only a couple of weeks later, he says, Philip, do you have these recordings of Charlie Hickson, Calvin Parker, Hynek, etc., etc.? Have you got these by any chance? I'm like, bugger it. Not only have I not got them, never heard of them. David has the machine, puts them in, digitize them. There you go. Amazing. Out of the blue. Out of the blue. Then, because I made an announcement about finding these recordings. Not I didn't find them, David did. A gentleman in Canada says, I've got a couple of things might interest you. So he sent me the tape with the sheriff announcing the polygraph tests on the radio and the audio of the Dick Cavett show. Then David came back to me a few weeks later and said, we've had a reel-to-reel tape donated to us, Philip, by a colleague. And there's something about Pascagoula on it in 1976. Do you want me to? Yeah, and he digitized that for me. And what that is, and I didn't know anything about it at the time, Hickson had passed the polygraph test in October 1973. They were recording him and Parker for a psychological stress evaluation test, PSE it's called. So in other words, we'll do a couple of test questions. What's your name? Calvin Parker. What's your favourite colour? Blue. What colour's your car? Yellow. You know, they're test questions. You're telling them. So now, and he gets them to tell them briefly about what happened. Supposedly you can put these recordings through a machine and it will tell by the stress levels in your voice whether you're telling the truth or not.
Yeah.
I've got this. I'd never heard of it before whatsoever. So I started digging and digging and digging, and I found more about the PSE test and more and more and more. So I started with nothing, with David Marler sending me this tape, and it's as clear as day. You know, it hasn't degraded. I end up with a whole new chapter in my next book, all about the psychological stress evaluator. And it's like the polygraph test. It's of no scientific use whatsoever. It's not allowed in a court of law. But in the court of public opinion, if you were to fail it, you'd be classed as a damn liar. But guess what? Charlie passed the psychological stress evaluation test. No problem. Just as he'd done the polygraph test. So it didn't prove anything at all. All I'm saying is it's there. It's new evidence that were found. If we look at Roswell, for example, all the people who were involved at Roswell in 1947 are dead. They've all passed on. So now, as you should have been doing in the first place, is looking in people's basements, in their attics, in their garages. Have they got stuff stashed away? Did one of the GIs serving at the base that time write home to his mum? Say, Mum, you never believe what's been going on. I'll give you another example. It's going back a few years now, might be, I don't know, 8-10 years. I was contacted by a company in the United States called White Tiger Films. And they said to me, what we do, we make TV movies, but accurate ones. We don't make them up, factual. And he says, one of our clients has been this lady. She was a private investigator, quite a well-known one, apparently. And, some of her famous cases, we've made little TV movies out. And she died. And her son and daughter were going through her belongings. And in her filing cabinet, there is a file called Roswell. They open it up. There is a VHS cassette and some paperwork. The VHS cassette is an informal interview with a chap called Deputy Charles Forgus. He didn't live in Roswell. He lived in a place called Big Spring, Texas. And he claims on this informal interview that in 1947, he was his deputy, and him and the sheriff were looking for a guy who'd been cashing dud checks in the area. He'd been caught, put in jail in Roswell. So they made arrangements to go and pick him up. And he said, en route, they heard about the UFO crash at Roswell on the police radio, managed to find the location, witnessed the events there before being politely but firmly said, look, guys, I don't think you should be here. You better go. They went and got their prisoner, went back, and forgot about it. Deputy Forgus is deceased. We published the story. We first heard from his nephew, and he said, my uncle was a dead straight guy. He served in the war, came straight out of the military and went into the police force. I even got his military discharge papers. We then found his son. And his son said, yeah, my dad told me about this before, back in the 1950s. And that was just sat in his private investigator's possessions.
So what you're getting at is there's a shed load of stuff out there. It's just waiting to see the light of day. Absolutely.
And that came to me, with the Pascagoula case, I've been asking, I must be a pest if I'm honest, but I always ask politely. I've pestered the bejesus out of anybody and everybody I could think of, and I've gone back and reminded them, oh, we've just found this. Like I said, when David Marler said, I've got these recordings, hey, presto, another chap pops up and said, oh, I've got a couple. Have you got these, Philip? No, I haven't. And then, there's no great whistle blowing in it, there's no smoking gun, but they all add to the collective information on this particular case.
So that's all we need then is a small domino to fall, and then you get the cascade effect, etc., etc.
Yeah. I
just wonder how much stuff is out there, and does it add extra information? Like, let's take Roswell as an example. Would there be photos of the supposed alien bodies and stuff?
Well,
would they be in private collections?
If it was a crash flying saucer, as they would have us believe, there should be a mountain of material. Literally, you would have. I don't know if you ever saw the film Independence Day, but they all legged it to Area 51. Of course, they've got one of these craft suspended and being tested, and they've got white-coated scientists by the zillion working on it. Well, that's what you would probably need to work on something like that. You certainly have people from a lot of different disciplines. And that would generate a mountain of paperwork. Where is it? People say, oh, well, it could well be there. Well, it could well not be there, because it may well not have been a spaceship, an alien spaceship in the first place. So you may be looking, it could well be there. You've just been looking in the wrong direction. But it is human nature, isn't it? When there's a switch and it says, do not touch.
Yeah.
But you want to do that. Don't take any photographs. And don't tell anybody. What? You'll know you're going to tell somebody. Everybody does.
Yes.
They just do at some point. I know there's one or two that don't, but by and large, I'll tell my best mate, because I know he won't tell anybody. Well, his best mate might tell his wife, because he knows she won't tell anybody. She might tell her best mate. You know what I mean? Oh, and that's the way, we as humans work. So technically, you would expect something like that to crop up. And the fact that it hasn't should be worrying to those that think that Roswell was an alien spaceship. Because if you look at, it's all in the news because of the movie. If you look at the Manhattan Project, which is the US building the atomic bomb, it was probably the biggest scientific project they've ever done. Super secret. Super, super, super secret. No. But it wasn't, was it? Because the Russians got the information, or I should say the Soviets at the time. The information was leaked to the Soviet Union by people working on it. And they did it for what they thought was the good reason, was that no one country should have this bomb. Because if it falls into the wrong hands, or if you get the wrong president, then, that's not right.
Mm.
So we better let the Soviets have it. And they did. So it was the most secret thing in the world at that time, probably ever since, if we're honest. So then go to a spaceship crashing in the desert in New Mexico. I've been out to Roswell. I've lectured there. I've been out in the desert. And it still is the arse end of nowhere, even today. It really is. And they celebrate that in Roswell. They say, we're 200 miles from nowhere. But you think about it, Truman was in charge. He was the president at that time. Can you think what a propaganda coup it would have been to announce, first contact? Unfortunately, the aliens that came have crashed and died. But they came to America, not to the Soviet Union, And via the back door, you could be letting your spies know that not only have we got our own nukes, you should see what these guys have got, But the propaganda you could have got from that would have been amazing. And we know what politicians are like. They like to, leave a legacy, have a statue built of them, and we did something great. That would have been a perfect opportunity. You could not have outdone that, could you?
No, I can see the benefits for reasons why they keep something like that a secret, and why they would do what you said, which is use it as a propaganda tool.
The problem with it being kept secret is this. They released the press release saying, bits of a crash disc and I've been flown to Fort Worth, etc. Within hours, the next edition of the newspaper or the next day, it's all a balloon. Forget about it. So let's assume it was a spaceship. Again, for sake of argument, what did they see in a matter of hours? Never having seen this technology before, that would put the cosmic Watergate, as it's been called, into place. And not only put it in place then, but keep it in place ever since. What was it be? What could you see in a matter of hours that would say, we cannot tell anybody about this?
Well,
now,
if you it'd be watch, technology or the bodies, wouldn't it?
Well, no. What's wrong with technology or bodies? Airplanes crash in the jungle. And the indigenous people see the technology. It's of a similar nature. there must have been something terrifying. Would mean you put. How would you understand it? I mean, let's put it this way. Dolphins on the planet Earth are the next most intelligent species to us. We can teach them to jump up and catch a fish, wave to the crowd. And scientists believe that these animals have a rudimentary language. And they are self-aware. I think, therefore I am.
Mm-hmm.
But yet you can't go and ask Flipper how he's feeling today, We can't communicate with them. So flip that, and you've got technology from another planet that must be so far in advance. How the hell would you understand what it was? And what would be the reason for putting the lid on it, both then and now? It's not that just a simple answer. Oh, it's aliens from another planet, and they've got some dead bodies. It's not as simple as that. It's how would we recognize the threat? Now, if you watch the fictional movie Hangar 18, which is loosely supposedly based on Roswell, they actually have the flying saucer in a hangar. And it takes them a while, but they get into it, and they've got humanoid bodies. It's not that bothers them. There's all these symbols all over the place, and you can touch them and they light up and what have you. And this, they're studying this for some time, and then they realize that the aliens are us. They made us. And that was the secret. Not the fact that aliens were here and they've come from where. They made us. Maybe they're coming back to check on their experiment. But the point being, I know it's a work of fiction, but the point being is you couldn't recognize that straight away. It would take a while to do that, not just overnight.
Mm. Yeah, very
think about it. It's just not that simple.
No, there's so many questions, and we can't resolve all of them, can we?
No. And the fact is, there is no paperwork, nothing from the Roswell crash, not a thing. Even Jesse Marcel Sr., the man who was the first guy out there from the Roswell Army Air Force, the base intelligence officer, he collected some of that stuff up and took it back to the base. I stopped off at home and showed his son it, Jesse Marcel Jr., whom I've met. They found his journal. Call it a journal, call it a diary. They found his journal, and there's not a mention of it anywhere in it. Now, ain't that peculiar?
Yeah, it's a strange case.
It is. So it's not straightforward and simple. Something happened at Roswell. Everybody agrees with that. I've been out there. There's 3 or 4 crash sites now, I believe. We had this old boy on a piece of film. Deputy Charles fought. His son said, "Oh, my dad told me about that back in the 50s when Roswell was forgotten about." So he can't have seen it on the TV back in the 50s. He can't have read about it. It was gone. It was literally 15 minutes of fame, and it disappeared. So it's not as straightforward as one might imagine.
No, there's a lot to it, and I suppose we may never find out the answers. But who knows? Like you say, treasure troves of data may come out, which shed light on it. So maybe that is to come in the future. Who knows? You never know.
Well, it should be there. It should be there somewhere.
Yeah, if it's a real scenario. Now, before we enter the Koit zone, I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person I speak to, which is what strange things have happened to you? Now, you've already recounted 2, your heart issue and then your wife's psychic Josh scenario. Is there anything else strange that sticks out for you?
I had a UFO sighting. I don't know if you call that strange, but
yes,
I was already involved in the subject, and I was working in a factory in Morley, which is just outside of Leeds. And I was doing my 2 to 10 shift. It was the July the 23rd, 1984. I finished work just before 10 o'clock in the evening, come out of the industrial estate, turn right onto the main road, and it is literally about 2.5 miles down the same road home. The only thing that blocks it going straight through is a roundabout about 2/3 away.
Okay.
It's a lovely summer's evening. It's not quite dark yet. And as soon as I get out, there's this light in the sky. And I knew it shouldn't be there. I knew my astronomy. I knew it wasn't an aircraft. I was in my little Volkswagen Beetle. So I set off. At one point, before you reach the roundabout, you fly over the motorway. And at the bottom of there is a bus lay-by. So I pulled in. I could see this thing, and it's still there. You didn't have to crank your neck up. It was there in your field of view. And I lined it up with a lamppost. It seemed to be stationary. Got back in the car, set off, back into Tingley again. There's another lay-by, pull in. And Tingley's up on the hill. The city of Leeds is in the valley below. It's all lit up. There's a hill opposite. You can almost see Leeds Bradford Airport on the hill opposite.
Okay.
To my right is another hill, and on there is the suburb of Leeds called Middleton. And there are two large lights hanging above Middleton. The right-hand one, they were parallel. The right-hand one was larger than the left-hand one. They were like a pearly white. They were very large, weren't like stars or anything like that. And they were just hung there. And there's cars going past me, it's a busy road behind. And then they're just gone. Didn't go up, down, left, right. And just
They
gone.
just blinked out.
Just gone. So I only lived round the corner. I zoomed round. I phoned my colleague, Mark Birdsall at the Yorkshire UFO Society, told him. I grabbed my camera and my binoculars, went back out to that lay-by, stood there for another hour. I didn't see anything else. But then the reports started coming in. When I get back into work the following day, bearing in mind some of these lads in the factory had ribbed me unmercifully about my involvement in the subject. And they stepped forward and said, Philip, did you see that thing last night? They were driving home either the same route as me or a similar route, and they too saw it. It ended up with lots of people seeing it. It came across Humberside, across West Yorkshire, out into North Yorkshire, and seemed to be heading back. Mark and I either interviewed or took statements from lots and lots of people. What the hell it was, I don't know. One answer that might explain it, this is 1984. It's the time of the miners' strike. Was this a helicopter of some respect? There are no mines in Middleton, though. Why the hell would it be hanging over Middleton? There is no picketing miners there. And the miners always knew where they were going to go and picket.
Were there any reports of sound though? Because obviously helicopters make a shed load of sound, don't they?
No, not at all. Not at all. And so I don't know is the answer. I'm pretty sure there could well be a conventional explanation to it. I never found one, and we tried our damnedest, and again, make of it what you will. What I'm doing at the moment is I've written a book for next year, another book, and it's called UFO Reflections. So it's a lot of the stuff I've been involved in down the years, plus my own. I've got to put that in there, plus my own sighting. And,
definitely.
I still have a few of the other sightings from that night, so I can put them in it as well, just to show you what other people were seeing. But the best thing for me was when I walked back in the factory the next day, and some of those lads who'd been taking the mickey out of me had to come up and say, Philip, I saw that thing last night.
Yeah, I bet you love that.
I said, you'll not be laughing at me now, will you?
Yeah, you bugger.
Yeah.
When you saw it, right, in your mind, was it, that's a UFO, that's a spaceship, or was, I don't know what that is, I'm just going to keep watching?
No,
what was the first thought?
It was just two lights. And sadly, I didn't have my camera with me, because I used to do a bit of photography. I'd had my car stolen at one point and my camera nicked. So I replaced it. So, because I used to leave the camera in the car at all times, I'd stopped doing that because I'd had it stolen previously. And I was irritated because I didn't have my camera. I mean, it cost me hundreds of pounds. I had lenses and filters and all kinds of stuff, but I know if I'd had my camera there that night, I could have got a nice clear photograph of that, whatever it was. So one of the things we tried to get in our head is if you did see something anomalous, make note of it.
definitely.
You know,
Time,
what
direction,
time is
everything.
it? I knew what time it was because I finished work at 10 o'clock. You know, where were you? Well, so I came back out the next day and took a couple of photographs of the area where it was, and I could have the photographs developed and draw on it. It was there, you know, and the apparent size of it. But so just be aware. There was nobody else around, although there were lots of cars going by. The lay-by I pulled in the second time was a bus stop. There's nobody standing at the bus stop. Otherwise, I would have said to them, "You see that?" You know. But what I did do, I reported it immediately. I got in the house, phoned my colleague Mark, you know, he made a note of it at that time. So it was just trying to record what was happening. Use all your senses, like you said. Any sound, I didn't hear any, but then again, there's cars going by me.
No, that's true, yeah.
Whilst it looked to be above Middleton, it could be well beyond Middleton for all I know. It's just that it looked to be above the town of Middleton. So it was just peculiar.
That is definitely goes into the strange bucket, doesn't it?
Well, but again,
right, Philip, we are now entering the Koit zone.
Koit zone!
In the Koit zone, I would just ask you some irreverent questions, some silly, some straightforward. Just answer best you can. So we will start with night or day, which is best for you?
Day, because I have problems sleeping.
Oh, okay. A story there, or just something you'll keep personal?
No, it's just since I finished working, you know, I have problems sleeping, and I've had hypnotherapy to try and sleep. I've had sleeping pills, just don't sleep very well. You know.
Wow. Yeah, I know someone else who's like that. It must be very frustrating. What is your favourite mode of transport?
The wife.
The taxi, yeah.
Yeah. Since when I had the arrhythmia and my defib fired, you're automatically banned from driving for 6 months. So you have to surrender your license. Because had that happened while I was driving, there's no way I could have controlled the car. If it happens twice in a year, you're banned from driving for 3 years. So I got back to work and I got used to my wife driving me around. So we used to have 2 cars. I retired. I now do this full time. Got rid of my car, have the wife's car. So I let her drive me around most of the time.
And you give her a tip occasionally.
Yeah.
What annoys you?
Politicians.
What, not answering a question? Or just them in general?
Well, I won't go into politics. Let's just say I used to be a trade unions officer. My dad was a coal miner. I was born and raised in a coal mining environment. So that should give you a bit of a clue.
No, I understand. Yep. When do you think the peak is for people? Is it youth, middle age, or older?
I would say 30s, in your 30s. You've already got a bit of experience behind you. And you've still got a long way in front of you. So I think I was at my peak in the 30s, and then the heart attack came when I was 41. So
that's early.
Yeah, it runs in the family. It was all downhill after that, but certainly the late 30s.
Okie dokie. Do you have any pets?
No.
Have you ever had any pets?
Always had cats and dogs. My mother had a parrot as well, but I don't have time and effort to take dogs out. My daughters, my youngest girl has 2 dogs, but no pets.
Okie dokie. What's the best live act you've ever seen?
Status Quo. Seen them several times. Love them. Loved them since I was at school, and still love them now.
Yeah, good. They did some good tunes, to be fair. Besides UFOs and aliens, what mystery out there also calls to you?
The universe. I mean, we've learned in certainly this last 10 or 20 years a lot more about the universe as a whole. It's now much bigger than we ever imagined, and this is the visible universe. You know, I think it's something like 48 billion light years across. And just try and get your head around that. 48.
Well, you can't, can you? The numbers are too big. Yeah.
There's an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. And of course, within those galaxies, like our Milky Way, there are countless stars and planets. I don't know what the next one up is from. Is it gazillion? Is it a bazillion?
Something like that.
I don't know.
Who knows?
So, you know, as we know on Earth, everything is finite. Everything comes to an end. We all die, everything grows. What about the universe? Does that come to an end? Is it infinite? Either way you look at it, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah,
Because
each answer is strange.
if you say the universe ends there, well, then what the hell is beyond that? If it goes on forever, well, how can it?
I know, neither makes sense, does it?
No. So
Not to this.
no.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I also love the universe. Best chocolate bar.
Snickers.
Okay.
Marathon, as it used to be known.
Yes, yeah. In the days when they were double the size, that's right. Sports, science, or both?
Sports.
Oh, what's your sport of choice?
Football.
Oh, you support a team?
Manchester United.
Oh, they're playing. Who are they playing today? Is it Fulham?
Yeah, they're at Fulham today.
Playing Fulham today. Right, final question in this. In fact, it's two more questions. But you find a book, right? And in that book, the answer to every question you ever have is written on its pages. But you can only look at one page. What is the question on the one page you're looking at?
Oh, that's good. It's the meaning of life. Because, of course, according to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the meaning of life is 42.
Yeah. And can you decipher that? Do you know what that means?
It means there is no meaning.
Correct. And the weird thing is, there's got to be somewhere else in there. Or is it just no meaning? Who knows?
No meaning. Life is just life.
And that's just like the universe thing, isn't it? It's scary if there is a meaning and scary if there isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very strange thing. Now, that book, do you sell that book?
Oh, absolutely.
Once you've got your answer, yeah, bugger off to
Absolutely.
somebody else.
Yeah. You want to know the answer? It's in here.
Yeah, that would be good. Right, that is the end of the Koit Zone. Thank you for going through that with me, which leaves me two final questions for you. What else do you like to do in your downtime? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
We used to walk quite a bit, me and my wife, when I was fitter, when when the heart failure wasn't, so severe. But I've got 6 grandchildren, so they keep us occupied, and they are an absolute joy. And they range from 18 months old to 14 years of age. So there's 6 of them, so they can keep us occupied.
Yes, and keep you in that life state because the energy of youngsters and all that. Final question. What are you currently working on? Now, I know you said some stuff previously, but is there anything else you're currently working on?
Yeah, there's always something. I mean, there's always something, lands on my desk that I didn't expect. I'm still working on the Pascagoula case. There's more stuff's come into my possession. So I'm looking at that. I've also been helping an artist, believe it or not. He wants to do some good representations of the Roswell crash. So he asked if I could help. Now, I don't have any more information than anyone else, but he is an extremely busy man. He is a professional artist. He says, Philip, I don't have time to surf the internet to look for this. So I said, what kind of military vehicles did they have in 1947? So I found them for him and sent him. I even found a vehicle where they put tanks on the back and transport them. If they've got a flying saucer, maybe they might have one of these vehicles in to put it on the back and transport. So I've been helping him. And I'm working on a documentary on the Pascagoula case with a filmmaker in Canada called Darcy Weir. And we should literally be seeing the first roughs of that in the next few weeks. So that's getting there. And there's a couple of other things that, that might come to fruition. We'll have to wait and see.
Now, that film, is that going to end up on Netflix or is that going to be a private distribution thing?
Yeah, it will be there somewhere. I don't know where. Darcy's a well-known filmmaker. His other documentaries are out there floating around. What we've tried to do with this one, because what we found with the Pascagoula case is that we ended up with a number of hypnosis sessions. We found out that Charles Hickson, for example, was hypnotized by Bud Hopkins twice in the 1980s. I have copies of those 2 sessions. Calvin Parker was in 1993. We found other hypnosis sessions, plus the ones that we've done in recent years with Maria Blair and Calvin Parker. So what I did, I put them into a book, and it's called Pascagoula 73, the hypnosis transcripts. So they're all transcribed. What Darcy's trying to do is bring them to life and use actual material from the original tape recordings. So we'll have the documentary and the book at the same time, all being well.
Well, that'd be amazing. And I hope you get a little bit of this from when that artist sells his Roswell pictures.
Well, he asked me for help, and he said, I'll do some artwork for you in return, Philip.
Oh, there you go.
I said, look, I'll help you anyway. I'd gladly help you. I've got actually, he worked with Travis Walton on some artwork. And I have a piece of his artwork framed and on my wall, signed both by the artist and by Travis Walton. But the artwork itself is fantastic. It really is top class. So I said, I'd just be delighted to help you.
Excellent.
Because he asked me, what kind of uniforms did the police wear in those times and things like that. So I get him pictures of it, send them to him. And
did you tell him it was a felt clown outfit?
Yeah, that would
with a microphone.
That would be good. Which alien case do you think I should draw next, Philip? Well, have you ever seen this one before?
Yeah, do that one. That's amazing.
But
Look, Philip, go on. Sorry. No, you carry on.
He's done a lot of album covers for rock bands.
Ah.
And it just so happens that one of his favourite rock bands, I saw them years back in the 70s, and he was very envious. You know what I mean?
And who
was
knows
them now. That was Judas Priest.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a bit envious. He's seen them, today, but he never saw them in their pomp, so to speak. So yeah, no problem. I'll help you. Gladly help you. I'll help anybody, mate.
Good on you. Fair play. I mean, why not? That's all that life is about, I think, is communicating, helping each other and getting through it the best we can, I think. But hey, There we are. Philip, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate you giving up your time. What I would say to the audience is, look, check out the links in the description to this video. We've got links to Philip's website and to the books, all right? So if you like what you've heard, go and pay him some more attention, yeah? So there's some great stuff there. Thank you ever so much for coming on, Philip. Much appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure, mate. My pleasure anytime.
No worries. And if we do get another chance to speak at some stage in the future, I would love to talk to you about two things. One, there's that Phobos crash, which I also think you dedicated a chapter to in your Russia book, because I think that's an amazing scenario. And also the Father Gill case at some stage.
Yes.
If we manage to get some time in the future. But thank you ever so much. Thank you to you all. Goodbye. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.